Good morning. My name is Father Larry Widener. I'm a Catholic priest. I've been ordained just over 33 years. 28 of those years was spent in parish life, and the last 4 in hospital chaplaincy. I'm the chaplain over at Banner Boswell. I noticed in your worship service that next week the special guest is Reverend Jerry, and he's preaching on Why Are We Here? I'm hoping that's no reflection on my preaching this week. So, I was invited by your pastor, Dr. Scott, and I'm very privileged and honored to be here. It's always good to see him over at the hospital. And so he's asked me to spend some time reflecting on to heal as Jesus healed. And then what does that mean? I want to start from our gospel reading this morning from St. Matthew. It's very short. It's the fourth chapter, the 23rd to the 25th verse. Jesus toured all of Galilee. He taught in their synagogues, proclaimed the good news of the kingdom, and cured the people of every disease and illness. As a consequence of this, his reputation traveled the length of Syria. They carried to him all those afflicted with various diseases, racked with pain and possessed, the lunatics and paralyzed. He cured them all. I want to look at this very short reading in the context of a couple questions. The first is to look at who Jesus healed. The second, why did he heal them? Thirdly, what did he heal? Those are important questions. The first is, who did Jesus heal? If you read through the Gospels, we see that in every one of them, Jesus was really healing. The first beginning of this reading deals with the fact that he kind of sets the agenda. This is at the beginning of his ministry for the next 3 years. A ministry of teaching and preaching and healing. So who did Jesus heal? He healed everyone who came to him, those who interceded for others, and those who wanted to be healed. We see in story after story that people would come to Jesus, he would cure them. There are stories when someone came in the name of someone else and asked Jesus to come and cure them. The person wasn't even present, but they were healed. But the thing that's constant in all of them is the willingness of the person to be healed. And I think that's just as true for us today. God does not force us to do anything. If we don't want to be healed, he's not going to force us to be healed. We have to have that desire and that belief that healing comes through Jesus Christ. And so we look at that in the context of today. It is Jesus' desire to heal every one of us here present in one way or another. As long as we have that openness and desire to allow Jesus to come into our lives and to heal us. The second question, why does Jesus heal? I think he heals because he loves us. And that's very hard to grasp sometimes. That's too simple. There must be something else. Life needs to be more complicated than that. It's not. He heals us because he loves us. And we find out that very early in the beginning of his ministry, carried on for 2,000 years, that healing makes a difference in our lives. He heals us because he loves us, because through our very baptism, we're called to holiness. We're called to be holy people. But the only way that we can be holy people is to be whole people, to be complete. Jesus tells us, I come to give you life and life to the fullness. And a life that is full is a life that is whole and a life that is holy. So Jesus, through our baptism, gives us the strength and the desire to call upon him to ask for healing for ourselves. Third question, what does Jesus heal? I think we get caught up in the fact that the most important part of our life that needs healing is our body. We don't think about healing much outside of our body. That becomes the focus. I experience that every day in the hospital. People are brought in some way wounded or broken, and it becomes our job, our responsibility to once again make them whole, to return them to their physical wellness. Several years ago, it was 1980, shortly before Easter, I was diagnosed with cancer. I remember the doctor saying to me, the surgeon, this is a very simple surgery. The cancer is limited to your prostate. We have several procedures we're going to do. You'll be out and back to work within a month. I thought, great. After the surgery, 2 days after Easter, when I woke up, there was my sister and the doctor, the surgeon, standing there. Give me the news that the cancer had spread. Both procedures had failed. That I had to go months of radiation and chemotherapy. I remember after that, I went home, I came back to see the doctor on how I was doing, and I was complaining to him about something. And he said to me, Larry, I'm trying to save your life. And you're worried about a few drops of urine. At that moment, I realized that I could die. And I remember going out after the appointment, sitting out in my car in its parking lot, and just weeping. I don't want to die. And went from that to almost being angry at God. God, we need to have a talk here. I've given 20 years of my life to ministry, serving you and your people. And this is the thank you I get? We need to renegotiate here. This isn't working for me. I then began 6 months of chemo and radiation. And after 7 months, I was able to return back to the parish, for I had been healed. And I'm now 13 years cancer-free. I give thanks to God for that, but I also realize that even in my own life, being healed physically is only part of the story. And I have to apologize. I'm on a medication that gives me dry mouth. So, excuse me a second. Otherwise, cotton will start coming out of my mouth. So if it's more than just our bodies that we need to experience healing, what else is there? I think we have to break our body down to realize there's our physicalness, there's our mind, there's our heart, our emotions, and there's our spirit, that which connects with God. And I want to share a few stories that kind of hopefully brings home each of those healings and how people have experienced them. The first is the healing of the mind. I was called in one day to a patient who was in third stage of cancer. He was actively dying, but he was still very conscious and aware of what was going on around him. And as I walked in the room, his wife was sitting there, excuse me, and the two of them were in an argument. It struck me kind of strange, but I didn't want to enter into it, so they stopped. I introduced myself, told them who I was, what I was about. We shared some words together, part of the story, what happened to him. We prayed. And then I said, I don't mean to be nosy, but when I walked in here, I noticed that the two of you were kind of in an argument, and I'm wondering what you were arguing about. And she said to me, this was in early December, she said, he wants me to put up the damn Christmas lights on the outside of the house. And she goes, look at him, he's dying. I'm dealing with all this stuff, and all he cares about are the damn Christmas lights. And so I said, all right. I said, tell me more. So she tells me about what a wonderful husband he is, all the wonderful things that he's done through the years, how he's taken care of her, how he's provided for her, she wouldn't know what to do without him. And I just listened. We finished. I said, well, okay. I got up to walk out of the room, and I almost got to the door, and I turned and I said to her, you need to put up those damn Christmas lights. And I could tell by the look on her face she wasn't thrilled with me. And she said, well, why? I said, I'll tell you why later. I went back to visit them the next day. When I walked in the room, there on the bed table, the bed tray, was a little picture about 5 by 7 of their house with the Christmas lights on. That she'd gone home that afternoon and put them up, took a picture of it, and brought it to him. When I walked in the room, he had this big smile on his face, and he points and says, look, look. She says to me, now you're going to tell me why I had to put those lights up? And I said, sure. In listening to you, in your husband's mind, he wasn't sure if you could take care of yourself, since he had done everything for you. And he figured that if you could put up those damn Christmas lights, you could do anything. He died mentally knowing that his wife would be okay, even if she was no longer there. That's a mental healing. He died with a sense of peace in his mind that she would be okay. Another type of healing is our emotional healing. It's difficult to get our hands on it sometimes. I was called to a room. There was a gentleman who was actively dying. He was on life support. And surrounding him were his 4 sons. His wife had already passed away. And they were in their mid-30s. And we had talked for a while to make sure that everybody was in agreement over withdrawal of life support. 3 of them said yes very clearly and distinctly. And one was kind of okay. And I thought, Because I've learned through the years that if you don't have the entire family in agreement over this issue of discontinuing life support, this will guaranteedly show up 6 months later at some meal when someone will say, well, we didn't want to do it, but you did. And you've got to resolve it then. So I make sure that everyone is really on board, if they're the medical power of attorney or not. And the youngest of the 4 sons wasn't on board. So I said, let's go take a walk. Walking down the hallway, and I said, I noticed that you weren't really all that convinced to discontinue, that you were feeling some pressure from your brothers. And he said, I'm the only one that lives out of state. I made that decision to move away from the family. I've been alienated from my father for several years. So I don't know how to handle this. And I said, okay. As your advocate, would you be open if I asked your brothers, since each of you had a unique relationship with your father, that each of you have a unique way of saying goodbye to him? I want you all to have that experience. So how about if I ask the other brothers to step out of the room, and one by one you go in and say goodbye to your father? And he said, okay. So I went back, I shared with the group what was going to happen. They all left. In my mind, I'm thinking this is probably going to take about 20 minutes. We went to another room and sat there, and the youngest son went in first. And he was in there over an hour. And the brothers say, what's going on in there? And I said, well, let me go check. So I go in, and I can see through the door, the window in the door, that this young man is sitting next to his father, holding his hand and weeping. I went back and I said, he's saying goodbye to his father. He came back, the other ones went. Every one of the 4, coming back in, had tears in their eyes. And as we gathered the second time around the father, it went from this mood of almost uncomfortableness. When I walked in, there was I could feel almost the anger in the room, the tension. When we gathered the second time, there was complete peace as these 4 sons said goodbye to their father, and they withdrew life support, and he died shortly thereafter. They had experienced emotional healing. Their bodies were fine, but emotional healing. And that's very important. The third one, if I can remember, we did our head, we did our mind. We'll jump to a story that sometimes we think, if we're in the ministry, we're the ones who are doing all the healing. We're going it for others. Through Jesus' name, we are the healers, the hands, and the prayer, the words of Jesus Christ. If we're open to being healed, that means we're all open to being healed, not just the patient in the bed. I remember a while back, I was called into a room, and there was a 19-year-old young man who they were going to remove life support on. And I thought that was unusual because we usually don't have someone that young at the hospital or dying that young. So this was kind of like interesting. I met with the nurse before, and this young man had had a stroke, and there was no brain activity. So I walked into the room. I'm so glad the nurse had told me something before I went in, or I'm sure there would have been a look of shock in my face. This young man was grossly deformed. He had the head of probably a 10-year-old. His entire body was maybe this long. His hands were all gnarly, his toes were all gnarly. On one side was sitting his mother and his sister. On the other side was sitting his father. And I just kind of asked some questions about what had happened, and they shared with me. I discovered that this young man was born this way. And at 19, he couldn't talk. They had learned to identify some of his grunts. He couldn't walk, he couldn't use his hands, couldn't go to the bathroom by himself. All he could do was kind of lay there. And for 19 years, this was what was going on, and now they were making a decision to withdraw life support, and they were heartbroken. And I was with them for about an hour and a half in the room. And during that entire time, there was always someone touching him. His mother, his sister, his father. We said the prayers, returning him back to God. We withdrew in a very short time, within a few minutes, he passed away. And as I'm leaving the room, normally those visits are complete. I have to move on to the next situation, so emotionally moving from here over to here. But there was something about that situation that bothered me. It bothered me for a couple days. I just wasn't able to bring closure to it. And so, out walking my dog one day, I was kind of wondering, I wonder what this is all about. And then the Lord revealed something to me. That was one of those aha moments. I grew up in a family that was very, very strict and very demanding. Demanding that things always be done a certain way, they always be done correctly. And the feeling was that I grew up with was, if you want to be loved, you better do things the right way. And if you really want to be loved, you better be perfect. So I entered this period of perfectionism in my life that drove everybody crazy, but I thought it was something I needed to do. And then I'm reminded, I'm standing in this room looking at this young man who is anything but perfect. And yet, his sister and his parents were loving him more than a lot of 19-year-old healthy teens or young people that live in the world today. And at that moment, I was reminded that perfection has nothing to do with love. We love people because we love them. Jesus loves us because he loves us. There doesn't have to be a reason. There doesn't have to be conditions. It's unconditional love. So in that situation, somebody in the family may have experienced healing. That's up to the Lord. But I know as the chaplain, I experienced healing in my own life. Again, as long as we're open to it, the Lord will work with us and bring that healing that is necessary. So it doesn't matter if it's our body, our mind, our heart, our spirit. God is there to heal. I have a young friend of mine who grew up in a Christian family, happened to be Catholic. And out of nowhere, and I still to this day don't know why, his father decided to become Jewish. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with being Jewish. But it wasn't just himself. He demanded that his entire family become Jewish, that they learn Hebrew. And all of a sudden, they were no longer celebrating Christmas or Easter. Friday night, they were gathering in their home as a small little temple and praying, singing. And I was traveling with my friend once, and we went in to visit a big cathedral. And he said, I don't want to go in. Okay. So I went in and toured the cathedral. It was beautiful. Came back and we were walking, and I said, what was that all about? And he said, after my father, I want nothing to do with religion. I want nothing to do with God. I don't want to be bothered with it. It's too complicated. It's too hurtful. Spiritual woundedness is very real in our world today. And people need to experience God's healing for that woundedness so they may be whole, going on to becoming holy. Your pastor asked me to speak today to kind of help maybe raise the level of awareness in your lives and to call you forth to become healers within your own community. Healing through word and healing through touch. And some of you may say, well, I can't do that. I just wouldn't know what to do. Well, you really don't have to do anything because the healing has nothing to do with you. You're not the healer. Do y'all know who Dr. Moody is? He was out of Chicago, opened a Moody Institute. He was very big in preaching and in teaching and in healing. And one day he's walking down the street of Chicago, and there's this gentleman who is intoxicated, laying in the gutter. And as Dr. Moody's walking toward him, the man looks up and he recognizes him. And he gets up. He walks toward him and he said, I know you. You're Dr. Moody. You saved me. And Dr. Moody looked at him and said, you're right, I did. Because if Jesus Christ had saved you, you would not be in the shape you're in right now. Healing works the same way. We open ourselves up to allow God to work through us because we don't know what the true healing that person may need. It's easy sometimes to see if it's physical healing. We can see that. But we don't know about how they think, how they feel, what their spirit looks like. I'm convinced through the years that being healed physically is not the most important healing that we can experience. It's the most obvious, but not the most important. We need to look at where we are with our heart and our mind, our spirit and our body, and be open to have God bring them together to make them complete, to make them whole. For only then can we claim to be a holy people.